And you guys can hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, she's already said good morning. I don't think she said good morning. She just said this meeting's being recorded. So I will say good morning. And we're of course continuing our study in John's Gospel today. Today I just got stuck on verse 32 and wanted to do a deep dive on that before we move on. We're just about towards the end of the chapter, coming up to a really interesting declaration spoken by Jesus that I'm really looking forward to. But before we do that, let's just go ahead and look at verse 32. Last week we're looking at this crowd during the festival of booths, which takes place in the fall. Jerusalem is bustling with activity. People everywhere. The attendees are in town. A lot going on over several days. And there's a crowd. There's obviously a crowd that John the writer is talking about. And we know that one segment of the crowd that we've already looked at is the scribes and the Pharisees. They are reacting negatively to Jesus's message and attempting to seize him. The second portion of the crowd are a portion of the attendees who are there, and they're listening to the same message. And they're saying that right here in verse 31, talking amongst themselves, saying, quote, when the Christ comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he? Boy, that's an awkward way to state that idea, but that's how they did it. So there's two segments, and today what we're going to do in verse 32 is actually we're going to kind of do a deep dive into these two groups. The summary from last time is the sign-seeking crowd as a whole is in no different place, of course that's a matter of my opinion, than those seeking to seize and control. Their current belief is still based from a binary, untransformed position. And that's a technical term that I've kind of coined here for this study. And by now, I think you probably have an idea of what I'm talking about. This area over here, pre that dark circle right here, is this area that is what I'm calling binary, primarily functioning out of this binary dualistic kind of thinking. And I would call that pre or untransformed position, of which most of humanity are operating from. As a group, they're seeking credentials as proof. They need more credentials. They need Jesus to perform. And it's as if they're saying, give us more facts so that we may have faith. And that's where last week we tied facts and faith. And this diagram illustrates the type of faith that this is fueled from. And the idea here, and I'm not criticizing this faith model. God, we all have to start somewhere. And it's the idea that these reservoir of facts down here feed into a timeline, and those facts are accumulated over time. And the goal of this is to build certainty. I want to be certain so I can believe. I'm not criticizing that, but I think there's another side to it. I think there's another level of this type of faith. And we talked about that last week. So reading the text, it says, many of the crowd, I'm going to reread 31, and then we'll look at 32. Many of the crowd believed in him, and they were saying, when the Christ comes, he will not perform more signs than those which this man has, will he? ? Then verse 32, and this is our text for today, the Pharisees heard the crowd muttering. these things about him, and the chief priests and the Pharisees sent officers to seize him. Just a comment, an aside, just by way of observation. We looked a couple weeks ago at the crowd watching the Pharisees. Now the Pharisees are watching the crowd. And I introduced that idea of mimetic imaging or modeling that is, I think, part of our human nature. We watch others, and that then initiates our action. And I think that is, I think that's true here. And it's also the second time within this passage that it says the Pharisees called the guards and attempted to seize him. So we have before us one general crowd, like I've already said, and two demonstrations, two polarized responses to the words and actions of Jesus. And both responses are from what I'm calling the pre-transformed binary position. And that's where we have come thus far. And the two groups are, on the left, those in power, and specifically the chief priests and the Pharisees. And then their mode of operation here in the words and actions of Jesus is seize him and contain him. And then the crowd, the general participants, festival attendees, they want more facts. And what I've attempted to show is that both the seize and contain and the more facts are based out of the same primary mindset. So let's take a look. Both groups are motivated from the human primal need to protect, which is illustrated in our diagram as layer one. And we've already looked at this diagram to some degree, especially out in this area here. We haven't gone in here yet, inside, but we do know that from the model, Jesus is operating from here in the crosshairs here in the middle, and the crowd is operating, at least from my perspective, out here in layer one. And layer one is about protection. It's all about, the primal needs of having water and shelter and food and protection, safety. It's the function by which most of the animal kingdom is, that's how they function. And there's an aspect of us as human beings that actually have that instinct as well to function at this primal state of protection. And that's what I'm going to attempt to show here. This perceived need to protect is instinctual and motivated by a perceived fear of loss. Right here, this is critical. This idea of loss. And that is what triggers, that's what's triggering the Pharisees and the leaders, those in power. And that is what is triggering the general participants to move into what I'm calling to self-protect, this fear of loss. The general participants are in fear of displacing, this is the loss, of displacing their own sense of self by giving place to another authority in their lives. So the way I'm thinking about it is that the general participants, they're driving for more facts. And the reason they're requiring more facts is there is some center they're working out of. And that center, we would call it ego. We would call it their sense of self. And for them to believe in this Messiah, this Christ, they have to give that up in order to give place to Jesus. We've all cut our teeth on just ask Jesus into your heart. Well, this is kind of what this is depicting here. They want to make sure before they make this move of giving over authority to another being, in this case, giving the authority of Christ, the designation of the one who is to come, to Jesus. They want to be sure, and thus they're protecting themselves until they're convinced, until they have enough certainty. Thus, their drive for more facts in order to gain more certainty of this authority. That's the statement. But this begs the question, guys, how many facts are enough? And we touched on this a little bit last week. What's enough? How many facts, how many tricks does Jesus have to do in order to get the crowd to believe? And that's why he's not playing the game, because it's not fueled out of sincere belief in the sense of that's not really the issue. The issue is giving up control for the general population. Now, on the other side of the coin, those in power have built for themselves a safe and predictable world. They're the ones in power. And this world that they have constructed consists of edifices. My goodness, I've been to that Temple Mount, and some of you I know have as well. And to imagine what that place was like in the first century, Herod's temple, it had to be one of the few wonders of the world. And to make that pilgrimage at least twice a year, sometimes more, at the time of Passover in the spring and the time of festival, and to come around the corner and see the mighty temple, and knowing that that's my place, I'm part of this. It had power, this beautiful, beautiful place. And it was a powerful place. They then also constructed rituals. There was the Mosaic law, and then later the rabbinic interpretations, and the laws were then redefined and redefined throughout centuries to be applicable to the time given, and these became the rituals. So the edifices, the place that the people could go and feel close to God, the rituals, the activities that they could do to cleanse their sins and to feel close to God, to feel right with God. And these guys were in charge of all this. And so I've got their prescribed practices. And then relevancy was the third thing. And I've got this note here, primal purpose, meaning within every human being, there is this need to feel right with God. We're made in the image of God. We're created to be, in a sense, like God. And there is a need within all human beings to feel close and in concert with God Almighty. So they have real relevancy. They have an audience, and they've become very they've become used to this power, this status, this walking around in the robes, and they could sense the people watching them. There goes a holy man, and they've become accustomed to that. And Jesus was a threat to them, because their threat was, they felt that he was a threat to lose power. They're in fear of losing this power by being displaced by another, by Jesus. They don't, all logic goes out the window when it comes to this need to protect right here. I'm not going to give up my turf. And it's the same thing we all deal with, the same thing we're seeing in our country. That's why it's so divided at the moment, because it's all about turf protection, um, less about policy and position, much more about ego. So self-displacement is being perceived by both groups, and that is absolutely terrifying to us human beings, to all of us. To sit at a dinner party and when the conversation doesn't revolve around me and feeling left out, that's self-displacement. Not getting what we think we need from another individual, whether it's a lack of a thank you or a lack of appreciation or whatever it might be, that's more indirectly that example, but it's self-displacement. It's not having the center, and that's hard for us. And when that is threatened, it is absolutely terrifying, and it feels like looming death. It's looming death over us. And this is in the natural human state I'm talking about. It's therefore only natural to self-protect, and we utilize any available resource to protect one's position. Thus, we have those in power. They want to seize and control because they're in charge of the security group. Let's just get rid of Jesus. The other folks they don't have that power at their disposal, so let's require more facts. And again, both being motivated out of this self-protection right here, layer one. This is where we're going to introduce the profound, guys, message and demonstration of the cross. And this is where it comes into play. This is where the cross comes into play in day-to-day life. Through letting go, which is so counterintuitive. What feels like self-displacement can actually be transformed into a profoundly new life experience. Through letting go, we move from this position to this position. Everything in our being wants to hang on, wants to protect our turf. We want to shout loud so we make sure we're heard. But Jesus, by his message and his life, is telling us it doesn't work. It's on the contrary. It's about letting go. And he says his life example is watch me. Thus, here it is. And this is what Jesus is inviting us all into. Every human being who has ever existed, he says to us all, follow me. Follow me. Watch me, and then follow me. That's amazing. So table time. Now we're going to have a good portion. We'll split into two groups this morning. So if you want to snap the picture, you can, but I'd like for us to delve into this personally in our little roundtables. How does the fear of self-displacement show up in your life? What does it feel like? What does it look like? What's the situation that arises when you start to feel this need to protect, this need to survive? And so I'd like us all to think about that. And then what default mechanism have you and I learned to employ to self-protect? Once we feel it, once we're feeling this need of being threatened, we all have some sort of mechanism that we've learned to use, and we're at our age, guys, we're really good at it. And so let's talk about this and just slow it down to maybe just work through that process to identify this process in our lives. And then a takeaway question this morning. This is just for reflection. If I mean, it's a free country. You can talk about this in your group if you wish, but really, it's more for a takeaway to think about. What have you? It's a question to ponder, because we're so fearful of losing. We're so fearful of loss as a species. And I'm going to pose the question: what have you and I ever really lost through letting go? Yeah, can you think of an example when you've let go, and what have you lost? And what have you ever really lost through letting go, in this case, of the perceived need to self-protect? So I hope these questions stimulate us in our groups, and I'm going to split us up now, and we'll go to table, and then we'll come back. We'll have plenty of time to come back towards the end and have some thoughts. So breakout rooms, we're going to do 2, and here we go. See you in a bit.
I think you're still mute there.
I'm going to stop the recording.